Kia ora koutou, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for another edition of the Ekos BioCredita webinar series. Ko Josh Lanehauers toko ingoa. I'm Josh Lanehauers, and I work as a carbon analyst here at Ekos. I am here with Sean Weaver, who is our CEO, who will be extending our knowledge once more on BioCredita. Just a reminder, BioCredita is a biodiversity credits program developed by Ekos to help fund biodiversity conservation in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Today we'll be specifically looking at the Accelerator program, which is a service Ekos is offering to provide technical and commercialization support for project developers seeking to participate in the biodiversity credits market through BioCredita. This will include background to support your application to participate in the Accelerator. Before we carry on, there are a few administrative things to share before we proceed. This webinar, like all the previous ones, is being recorded to be made available later on the Ekos website and directly to all who have registered. We'll use the format of hearing from Sean first, explaining how the Accelerator program works, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A as we have done in the past. So you can start posting your questions in the Q&A chat below throughout the session, and you may upload questions if the existing ones that you can see there align with you. So let's get started, Sean. We've created a lot of enthusiasm amongst both potential BioCredita project developers as well as credit buyers, of course, through our webinar series and other communication channels. This has resulted in many conservation projects considering applying to register in the BioCredita program. Due to the volume of interest from potential projects, we have decided to offer an accelerator program to provide support in a structured way through a series of workshops and one-on-one engagements. So I'll pass over the mic to you, Sean, so you can explain a little bit more about this, please.
Thanks, Josh, and kia ora, everyone. So what I'll do is I'll run through a PowerPoint presentation and then open it up to Q&A. Yeah, so this is an introduction to the BioCredita Accelerator program that we are going to be offering for the remainder of this year for a group of projects that want to develop a BioCredita biodiversity credits project with us. So the purpose of the Accelerator is to support biodiversity credit project development, and we want to model a process that could be potentially supported in future by funders or government, and also we plan to offer the Accelerator annually or possibly even more frequently if there is interest. But this is our first cut at offering a set of workshops with a select group of projects so that the learning and training can be done in a shared way, and we can then provide some one-to-one support as well as group workshops. So a key caveat here is that BioCredita as a biodiversity credits program is a net, it's not a fish. And if we imagine the metaphor is the fish is money, we're not a source of money. We are just a net to help you source money for your project. So that's really important. We're not the source of money. That source of money comes from different places, but ultimately it's really the buyers of biodiversity credits, those entities that want to fund biodiversity conservation by buying biodiversity credits. They're the key in the value chain here. One thing also to mention is that projects that have been developed by community organisations for biodiversity conservation have often relied on grant funding, and grant funding is different to participating in markets, and in fact going down the pathway of nature markets means you're going to meet a range of different challenges. And so there's a lovely poem by Robert Frost where two roads diverged in a wood, and he says at the end of the poem, "And I will be saying this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference." So the road less travelled for most of us is the market-based approach to nature financing. And my dream is that in the future we will reflect on the fact that back in 2025 we started this journey, and now look at how much private sector money we've unlocked together, and look at how much biodiversity conservation we've managed to achieve together. However, it's not necessarily just an easy pathway. The nature markets path is a steeper path than grant funding, but it also leads to much larger potential sources of money. The other thing to note, however, is that there are no guarantees in this space. It's like any market. There's no guarantees that if you're a producer of widgets, there's no guarantees you're going to sell all of your widgets. You've got to get out there and do this. And so this is a process of transforming from a project into a social enterprise. And in any social enterprise support process, there's the supporter or the training or the incubation of social enterprises and startup entities. There's never a guarantee by the supporter that you're going to be successful. Our job as supporters and enablers is to increase the probability of you being successful, but ultimately that success is up to you. We can try and help as much as we can, but fundamentally that's your job. So another caveat is that biodiversity markets are in their infancy. It's a wee bit like where carbon markets were sort of 25 years ago, with very small numbers of pilot projects, without a big established market, without a compliance market where governments require entities on the demand side to purchase. So it is at early stages in this market. So let's be very clear about that. The scale of supply, which is the supply of biodiversity credits, is very much dependent on the scale of demand. And this is true for any market. And so no matter what market you're working in, you can only afford to produce a volume that is in proportion to the volume of demand and the revenue that comes from the sales arising from that demand. So that's an important thing to note. And I say that because this workshop is among potential suppliers of biodiversity credits. And as a community of suppliers, it's important to acknowledge that the volume of supply that can be delivered through this market will very much depend on how much demand is out there and how much demand we can cultivate together. So the accelerator is supporting supply, but it's also supporting projects and their ability to engage with demand and increase the probability of securing that demand. But projects need to secure that demand themselves, and that requires marketing and sales effort. And this is a commercial activity, which is not quite the same as grant funding. You have to have capability and skill in both the technical side of things, but also this business side of things, this commercialization side. So this accelerator is designed to provide both sides of that support. The project cycle, as an overview, 4 broad stages. There's the project idea note. The PIN is the first stage, which is a proposal, a short form proposal. Then there's the project description, which is a very detailed set of reports that document everything that's going to happen in a project. So it's a much more detailed proposal, essentially, because when you develop a project, you need to have a plan for everything you're going to do. So that's essentially the plan, is the project description. Then there's project establishment, and in some situations you'll have to establish your ecosystem because you might be re-wetting a wetland or planting something somewhere. And if not establishing an ecosystem, you still have to establish the project, and so there's costs associated with that. And then there's ongoing project operations for the duration of the project period, which is stage 4. So the first 2 stages are planning and validation, and the second 2 stages are implementation and verification. So just to clarify the meaning of these 2 words, validation and verification, the word validation is always referring to a proposal, whereas the word verification is referring to evidence that something has been delivered, to verify the delivery of those deliverables. And there's an audit process for both of these broad parts of a project. There's a third-party audit of the project description that confirms that the plan complies with the standard, and then the project description is valid. And then in an ongoing way, the project produces monitoring reports, and those monitoring reports are subjected to verification audits in an ongoing basis through the life of the project. So in detail, the purpose of a project idea note is a proposal for fundraising. So it's a business case as well as an initial plan of what you're going to do. And in a way, if you want to use the fishing metaphor, it's kind of like the bait that you use to catch capital if you need to raise capital to do project development. In other words, funding for project establishment. But it's also the bait that you would use to catch potential buyers, because ideally projects will start looking for buyers early in this process, and buyers and funders want to look at a proposal of some form, and that's what the project idea note is for. Project idea notes are typically self-funded. Sometimes organizations have grant funding to support that, but it's really, it's like when you go fishing, you got to go and buy the bait so that you can then go catch the fish. This accelerator is designed to deliver projects to the point of having completed their project idea note, and some projects will also have made some progress towards completing elements of their project description, because the project description is really a much more detailed version of a project proposal. So there's a transition from project idea note to project description. As I say, some projects will advance through some stages of project description in the accelerator. Others will just get to the end of the project idea note stage. Now, Ekos will offer further project development support and commercialization support after the accelerator, just on a case-by-case basis as a consultant. And the project description, because it's a very detailed business plan and management plan, tends to require quite a lot of time and effort, and that typically needs to be funded by something or someone, and which is why projects often need to raise money in order to be able to complete a project description. And a project description might take a year to develop, might take less, but in the carbon markets where we've had a lot of experience, and especially in the international voluntary carbon markets, project descriptions can take 1 to 2 to 3 years sometimes to develop. We've designed the BioCredita program to try and simplify this so it doesn't take as long, and ideally the project description would probably take 6 months to a year, we'd imagine, but possibly shorter for some. Project establishment is going to be ideally funded by some kind of investment, like a loan, for example, if you're establishing a new ecosystem and doing some engineering to re-wet a wetland, and that is going to cost money to establish that project. That's still your project establishment cost, which is essentially what investment is designed to cover. And the project idea note is the proposal to try and win that investment. But ongoing project operations for the duration of the project, maybe it's 30 years that the project is going to go for, those ongoing operating costs beyond the project establishment costs, those are funded by the unit sales of biodiversity credits year on year. So the application process. So the call for applications is going out right now, today, and the process will go for almost a month, and we're going to close applications on the 10th of October, and then in the week following that we will shortlist the accelerator applicants, and then we will select the first cohort, and we'll have that done by the 24th of October. The cost for the accelerator participants is $5,400. Why do we charge a fee? It's because we're not being funded by anybody. We're a business, and we can offer our services, but we can't offer those services for free, because if we keep doing that, then we will go out of business. So we need to cover our costs, and that's why we're charging a fee. But the benefits of being part of an accelerator means that you're essentially getting a discounted service, because if we were just providing technical and commercialization support to each project one-to-one, then it would cost more than $5,400 for us to provide that service to you. But because we're doing it as an accelerator with a group of projects, we can run a series of group workshops, as well as in between those workshops provide one-to-one support to individual projects that would be, as I say, technical support and commercialization support. So that's what the costs are, why there is a cost, and also what are the benefits of that cost. So I've already said that. So going to the next part of the puzzle, just looking at the timeline, we're planning to have the accelerator begin in late October with an initial consultation with each successful participant, so that we can identify your project needs, your capacity, and undertake just a broad gap analysis to see how our support can best fit your needs. And so we'll do that one-to-one, ideally on the 27th and 28th of October, at the end of the month. And then we'll use that input to help design our series of workshops. And the first workshop will be in November, towards the beginning of November. We'll determine the date for the workshops by a doodle poll that we share with each of the participants, rather than us set the dates in concrete and the participants having to say, right, okay, we have to meet that date regardless of what we're doing at that time. We'll find dates that are suitable to each participant because everybody's busy doing other things. And so we'll have the first workshop, which will focus on providing a technical backdrop and technical support. I envisage these workshops to be maybe like taking up a morning, sort of about 3 hours probably. And after that, we'll provide some one-to-one consultation workshops with each participant. And that'll allow us to unpack some of the details of the first workshop and provide some tailored support to each project from that technical angle. And this includes things like methodology design, methodology development, these kinds of things, helping to troubleshoot the problems that you might have in your project and us to provide our advice on how to work through these things. Then we'll have a second webinar also in November, and that will focus on commercialization support. Again, we'll need to put aside a morning. So we need to find a date that's going to work for everybody for that morning or afternoon, as the case may be. And then after that, we'll have a one-to-one consultation workshop individually with each participant in the accelerator to help unpack some of the details of that commercialization process. Different organizations are going to have different needs with respect to commercialization support. Some community organizations are already well organized and already undertake some level of sort of business activity, and some are brand new to the whole process of the commercial world. And so we are here to support that transformation, if you like, from a project into a social enterprise. And a key kind of philosophical element here is that we're trying to help projects become a business without having to throw away any of your core values, right? Because there's many different ways of doing business and many different ways of doing enterprise. This is very much about maintaining the values that you already have as a community and as an organization, and finding a way to press that into a business structure so that you can participate in a market. Then in early December, we'll have the third workshop, which is sort of tidying up the business case and the project idea note and finalizing your pitch, because each project is going to need to pitch a proposal to someone. If you're part of a large organization and you need to pitch a proposal to your higher-ups, then this is part of that puzzle. If you're a smaller organization that needs to raise some funding to do the full project development, then essentially that's a pitch to either a grant funder or a commercial finance provider, like a corporate sponsor or possibly a loan. And then once that workshop is complete, we will invite the participants to, when they're ready, and ideally in December, submit the project idea note, which we will then review, and assuming that it's all good and fine, we'll approve it, and that will enable projects to be registered as a participant in the Ekos BioCredita program and have a registry account opened on the Ekos SD Registry. One of the things that we're hoping to do with the cohort of participants in the accelerator is provide stronger opportunities for you to raise money, either from raising capital for project development and or securing buyers for your biodiversity credits. Now, it's very sensible in any commercial setting to try and secure your buyers before you've basically produced your first set of widgets. Because the risk, if you don't, is that you produce a whole lot of biodiversity credits and then they're sitting there in the registry and remaining unsold. So that will have to happen for many projects, but we want to minimize that risk by getting projects out there hustling for buyers early in the process. And what a buyer is going to be interested in is, well, how is this credible? And one way of saying that you're credible is to say, well, we're registered with the Ekos BioCredita program, and look, here is our project listed on the Ekos SD Registry, and the documentation will be sitting there on the registry for those buyers or funders to have a look at. So it helps to strengthen your credibility in front of those kinds of people. So the selection criteria for the accelerator. So there's a range of criteria that we will be using to evaluate the proposals for participation in the accelerator. The first criteria is the capacity to engage in the accelerator itself. So this is ensuring that the project developer has sufficient capacity to commit staff and time to training sessions and getting on with this. So for example, if the project has been led by a single individual and there's nobody else in your group, it may still be acceptable in the accelerator, but that individual person would have to be able to demonstrate to us that they're committed to this and have the time and the capacity to do everything that needs to be done. So that's the first thing. Second one is the organizational capacity. So we want to look at the capacity of the organization behind the project to effectively undertake, govern and manage a project. Now, some applicants may be light on their organizational capacity, and they may want to strengthen that organization through time as they develop the project. And so if you're a very early stage project without a strong organization, that does not mean that you're ineligible to participate in the accelerator, but you need to be aware that organizational capacity building will be a significant part of project development. The next capacity criterion that we're going to look at is the technical capacity of the applicant to engage with the technical elements of project development. And this is twofold. One element is your ability to deliver the conservation management interventions that would be necessary to enable this conservation outcome to happen at the project location. So that's the interventions. And the second is the capacity to do measurement, reporting and verification of those interventions. The verification piece happens with the verifier, but the measurement and reporting part of that is done by the project developer. So we'll be evaluating your ability to meet that criteria. And again, if you don't have that capacity right now, but have got a good plan of how you will get it, then that can enable you to come into the accelerator potentially. The next criterion is the capacity for commercialization. So similar to the technical capacity, we are going to look at organizations and project proposals that have indicated the extent to which, or shown us the extent to which you're capable of engaging in the commercial elements of project development. And if you've had no experience in commercial business activity before, that doesn't matter, but the capacity to effectively engage in this means the capacity to be willing to learn and to adapt and take on some of the responsibilities that come with a commercial project. And that's principally around things like financial discipline, really good governance, the ability to have a sales and marketing capability. And if you don't have that capability yourself, then to be willing to engage potential outsourced capability for those services. We're going to look at activity types as a criterion. What we don't want is a whole lot of, maybe, I don't know how many projects we'll have in the accelerator. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 8, I'm not sure. Maybe it's 12. But either way, we don't want them to all be the same activity type where every single project is doing the same thing. That's going to be less valuable than, to us at least, than having a range of different project types that are doing different things, because what we want to do with the accelerator is showcase the different things that are possible in a biodiversity market. So this includes single species protection of perhaps a migratory species and what kind of activity needs to be delivered to support that species. It could include imagine a colony of penguins that needs some protection for its nesting, its rookery, for example. So that's probably quite a small scale project, very focused around that particular species. And that's quite different to a project that might be a marine or coastal project that's focusing on the vegetation. Different again to a riparian project that's focusing on the habitat of a river. And different again to an area-based terrestrial project that is, doing invasives control in an area, which would be different again to a project that might want to create some kind of marine reserve and is going to work with local fisher folk to find a future where we have marine biodiversity conservation in the inshore marine environment. So we're keen to see different activity types. We're also keen to look at have at least one example of different project pathways. So the two main project pathways are where pathway 1, you create biodiversity credits, right? And that's called the tradable unit pathway. But pathway 2 is where you just want to have your project verified. So imagine you're already doing a project and you have an opportunity to win future funding for the project, but the funders have said, look, we would prefer this project to be third-party verified, to be independently verified as delivering the benefits that you claim, and we'll fund the project on the basis of that verification. And so we're keen to support a project, at least one project, who wants to develop in that way. In terms of project geography, we're also keen to support projects from different geographies. We don't want them all clustered in the same region. And this is also including projects that might be in different countries, because the BioCredita program is not limited to New Zealand. We've already had interest from different locations in the past, including Indonesia, Brazil, Ireland, Australia, and so forth. So if there are project developers out there from any other country, we're open to you being part of the accelerator, and we'll consider your application on that basis. Our credentials and why we're a benefit to you in terms of supporting you. We've had 30 years of experience in environmental financing. 20 of those years have been in nature market project development. We were the first in New Zealand, as far as we know, to sell biodiversity credits back in 2014. We're a founding member of the Biodiversity Credit Alliance, which is an international body for setting integrity safeguards for biodiversity markets globally. And we've built the BioCredita program to international integrity benchmarks, partly in consultation with and in alignment with our work with the Biodiversity Credit Alliance. We listed the first New Zealand project on an international trading platform for biodiversity credits. That's the Sanctuary Mountain Project, Sanctuary Mountain Maunga Tautari, and that's listed on Climate Trade in Europe. That was listed a couple of months ago. And we've been trading biodiversity credits from Sanctuary Mountain Maunga Tautari since 2022. So we've got some experience in the space, and we've learned a lot in that time. And we've also just supported commercialization support, or provided, I should say, commercialization support for voluntary carbon projects in different countries over the last couple of years through the Plan Vivo Foundation, which is kind of the world's leading fair trade forest carbon standard. And we've supported projects in Africa, Latin America, Asia with that process. So that's our experience. How do you apply? you may already have a link to the application, but if you've forgotten where that is, or like me, you can't find all your emails because there's a waterfall of emails every day, then you can just go onto our website and click on the biodiversity credits line of our homepage. Up the top line there, you can see just beside the word home, you've got the word biodiversity credits, and then that will take you to this page. And then on the biodiversity credits page, there's a button there to apply for the accelerator. So click on that, and that will take you through to a form to fill in, and fill in that form, and that's me done and dusted. So I'll stop sharing, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Brilliant. Hey, thanks so much, Sean. I think this sort of brought home the purpose and the need for the accelerator program. And each organization will hopefully be able to discern whether this would be a helpful pathway for them in terms of who's in the audience at the moment. Obviously, the context will be slightly different, of course, for each one. So yeah, let's move on to the Q&A stage of the webinar. So thanks to those people in the audience who have posted questions already. You can still post additional ones, of course, and upvote existing ones if you want them to rise to the top. We'll be prioritizing them. And we've also attempted to categorize them a little bit in the background as well. But I think we've got a pretty good chance to get through quite a few of them. So if I apply that reasoning to what we've got at the moment in terms of what's the most upvoted question, there's a question here, Sean, about how what we're doing here with BioCredita aligns or fits in with the government nature credits. Just wondering whether you could maybe comment on that in terms of what the connection is and how they might collaborate, work alongside each other.
Sure. So the government has an aspiration for, or it's signalled an aspiration for a biodiversity credits market, a nature credits market, of which biodiversity is a part of that. And it's at the moment in the process of wanting to learn from early movers in this space. So it's not providing anything in particular at the moment. It's really a wait and see for the government. And one of the ways that, the government is learning from people like us who are out there pioneering this, and then we can share that learning with the government. And one example of that pioneering is how to structure an accelerator program and how that goes and what that looks like and feels like. Because ideally in the future, if we do have a strong biodiversity market where demand has been ideally stimulated by government, who sends market signals to corporate New Zealand and to across the economy that, environment, social and governance reporting is going to be much more mainstream in the coming years, as an example, then we need to support, New Zealand Inc. needs to support projects coming into a brand new space. And so accelerators like this are going to be one way to do that. And so this accelerator will be a useful learning for the government. And ideally, in future, the government or a funder, doesn't have to be the government who's funding things, but funders might think, an accelerator is a good way to provide funding for project development because you're getting aggregated support to a cluster of projects. And maybe this will provide us a chance to win some funding so that in future projects might be funded to participate in the accelerator. So the trouble at the moment is that we don't have that funding. And so we've got to use what financial resources we've got at our disposal. And that requires us to charge fees for this accelerator. But the market advantage of being an early mover is that you get in early and maybe stay ahead of the game. But so hopefully that's answered that question. And if there's supplementary questions relating to that, please feel free to ask them. But broadly speaking, at the moment the government is learning from what different entities in the market are doing, learning lessons from that, and wanting to eventually provide some integrity safeguards, guidelines and things like that for the market, as well as potentially other things like demand stimulation and hopefully, ideally, some funding to support projects. Because imagine if the future is that there's lots of demand for biodiversity credits, but projects still need to raise capital to fund project establishment. It would be really cool if government were to put some money into supporting that project development, where you could apply for grants in order to participate in a market where that grant funding is seed funding for what will become a self-financing future for the project.
Great, Sean. Thanks for that. Yeah, so we're at that stage, of course, where the government will also be looking at what's happening because we're kind of at the cutting edge, of course. I suppose if they recognise that there's public good to be gained to be involved and develop what they can offer as well, that's great. How we can possibly look at those kind of partnership and how what we're doing is feeding that and informing that. So moving on to the questions, there's a little bit of upvoting happening. So the what's up the top is shifting continuously. I might just see if I can wrap two questions up at the same time. There's a question from Wiramu about kind of maybe a minimum size criteria for projects, and then I'm kind of adding it to, it's not quite related, but it's around kind of the criteria for projects. And then Carolyn Latham is mentioning whether a typical family farm might likely meet their selection criteria. So kind of maybe giving us some ideas. You've already mentioned, of course, kind of that you're looking for a diverse range of types of activities, but maybe would a family farm be something? And also, what sort of scale are we looking at in terms of any project, I suppose?
The answer to both is yes. There's no minimum size. Imagine, there might be a very, very rare species of bacteria that grows on chalk dust in schoolrooms or a back room of a schoolroom as far as I know, and that room might be the project for, I don't know. There's any number of possibilities in terms of scale. So we're not going to be prescriptive about that. It's really about what is the biodiversity conservation gain from this project. And we don't mind if the project is small. A small project will produce a small volume of biodiversity credits. And so in a way that's easier to sell than a project that's needing to raise $3 million a year from the sale of biodiversity credits. Maybe it only needs to raise $20,000 a year. So the size of the project's not really a problem. And in some ways, smaller projects at this stage in the history of biodiversity credit market development, sometimes smaller projects are better because you're piloting what could become a scaled up activity. So if you have large ambitions, great, but I would encourage potential project developers to think, okay, of this larger ambition, what is the first slice? What is the first piece of that larger ambition that we could put into this so that it's manageable, so we can learn from this? And as we learn from this, we can then scale up, right? We can add to the project. So, for example, once you've got a project established, and maybe it's 40 hectares of an area-based project, and you've done that, it's all delivered, and then in year 3, you think, okay, it's time to go from 40 hectares to 400 hectares. And you just expand the project boundary, no problem. But if you go for that 400 hectares right at the beginning, the complexities of the project might make project development quite hard for you. So, there's a kind of a sweet spot there of big enough to be meaningful, but not so big that it's unmanageable. For a family farm, absolutely. There's nothing to stop a family farm being a project. It's really about what's going on that farm. That's interesting. That's a genuine contribution to biodiversity conservation. And I could imagine a farm that's upgrading from one type of farming to another, where it's changing its farming practices across the whole farm that would potentially increase the biodiversity status of several parts of the farm, like the soils, the waterways, the terrestrial habitats, wetlands, and so forth, as an integrated whole. Sure, no problem.
Right. Thanks again, Sean. Thanks for covering both those queries thrown at you at the same time. And I suppose you mentioned really around kind of perhaps the sky's the limit in terms of kind of scale as well. I suppose for some people on their mind, if they're looking at smaller projects, possibly they're thinking about what about there will be an initial cost, whatever the situation is. So there's a question from an anonymous attendee saying, in addition to the application fee for the accelerator, are there other key costs, I think, that developers should be aware of now, costs such as verification fees. So kind of just to lift the veil on a little bit.
For sure.
What else is there to be able to front?
That's right. There are fixed costs for any project of any size. And those fixed costs are, you need to have a registry account, and the registry account fees are, I don't have them in front of me, but they're about $500 a year to have a registry account. You need to have a validation audit at the beginning of the process, and the cost of that audit really depends on the size and complexity of the project. But you're looking in the order of between $5,000 and $15,000 for a verification, a validation audit at the beginning of the process. And then there's the annual verification audits to produce biodiversity credits if you're doing it on an annual basis. Those are only for the project deliverables, so that's not necessarily measuring biodiversity change in the ecosystem. That can happen over a slightly longer time frame, like every 5 years. But each year, a project will need to generate its deliverables report, essentially an annual report, and that annual report gets verified, and the cost of that kind of verification is in the order of $5,000-ish. Then the cost of project development is really how much time and resources is it going to take you to develop your project. Like if it's a big and complex project, you know, that's really, it's not a fixed cost, that's a variable cost, but that is a cost. So part of the process of doing, one of the outputs of the project idea note is your budget for project development. So you'll be developing the project, the full project development and the first cut of your operations budget, so you'll understand what your costs are. Now, all of these costs that I've mentioned are designed to be funded commercially. Right, so if you separate the costs into two pieces, one is the project establishment costs to create the, if you like, the biodiversity credit factory that you're going to build, if you think of it in those terms. So building your biodiversity credit factory is establishing your asset. And so the cost to develop that is your capital expenditure. Right? And typically capital expenditure is funded, well, in conservation projects in the past and up until now is often funded by grants. But in this situation, ideally it would be funded with some sort of debt, like a loan. So you can get commercial money for that. And then the ongoing operating costs from as soon as projects established and every year for the next 30 years is funded through the sale of biodiversity credits. And the unit price of the biodiversity credits includes the cost of servicing that debt. Okay, and this is why getting buyers early in the process is so valuable, because if you can get a buyer to say, hey, I love this project and I agree in writing to buy all of the biodiversity credits that come off the project, or a certain proportion of them, at the agreed unit price, or at whatever price the project needs to sell them at, then you can use that agreement to go to somebody to get a loan. Because the person providing the loan can look at this agreement and go, well, look, there's a really good chance of me getting my money back and my interest. So we're turning this into a commercial exercise. And so the costs, even though there are costs, and we can't say what all of them are going to be at the moment, because several of them are variable, but those costs will be much more clearly understood, especially the variable costs, after you've developed your project idea note. And then that's designed to help you then decide on what is your financing strategy. Do you want to use the project idea note to go fishing for a grant? Or do you want to, like, casting your rod into the river? Or do you want to cast your rod in the ocean and go for commercial financing? So a loan from a bank, or a commercial loan from a corporate, or from some kind of investor. So that's how that pans out. So hopefully I've answered that question.
Yeah, great, Sean, because I think it's really, in terms of if you're getting debt, they'll be looking for reassurances of how you can service that. And what you've just illustrated there is something perhaps that's more secure and more attractive for a financing organization, rather than a grant. You may or may not land them, and this might give them a bit more assurance in that sense.
That's right. And also, imagine we together develop a bunch of biodiversity credit projects that all need capital, and in aggregate they need capital. So we could potentially fundraise together in aggregate for the capital for all the projects in the accelerator. That's another benefit of having an aggregation of projects. And in future, ideally, somebody like the government could consider, and I would certainly recommend this to government as a really potentially key role of government, is to be an underwriter of that debt, so that if you've got a government guarantee, then you can go to a bank and say, look, can I have a loan for $300,000 to stand up this project? And I'm going to recoup that loan by selling these biodiversity credits. And I've also got a government guarantee, so that if I only sell 80% of my credits in any given year, the government will fund the remaining 20%, so that I can make sure I can pay my debt back to you. Once somebody is underwriting a debt, it's a lot easier to get access to that debt financing. And again, who would that person be? Well, it's ideally it's a role of somebody who has a longer term interest strategically in building and supporting a market-based mechanism, so that ultimately most of the financial heavy lifting for biodiversity conservation on private land can be done by the private sector.
Right. Yeah, makes sense, Sean. The questions are coming in thick and fast, so I'm going to move on to the next one up on the top of the list. It's from Di Rossiter, kind of harking back to your comment about social enterprises, and arguing that, or saying that Ekos is in a position where we're possibly better connected than most community groups, and kind of highlighting really, or querying whether Ekos has a role in cultivating demand alongside social enterprises. So maybe touching also on terms of where our boundary lies in terms of what services we offer.
Yeah.
And you mentioned already before in terms of our role. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, and to be clear, Ekos isn't a project developer. We can't develop projects and certify them to our own program, because that would be marking your own homework. So we can't do that, but we can provide technical and commercialization support to projects, especially at an early stage in the development of a market. In the future, that support won't be needed, ideally, because there'll be consulting firms that provide that are not us, and we can focus on, on managing the registry and the standard and upgrading it and expanding it and doing those sorts of things. But in terms of the so remind me of the part of the question I haven't answered.
Really around the question is really whether we have a role to cultivate demand alongside.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is, in principle, yes. Like, we want to support a cohort of projects to help the projects raise capital and help the projects find buyers, because we can be part of, imagine the cohort becomes a team, right? Team Accelerator Cohort 1. And together we go out to raise capital, and together we go out to find demand and pool our resources. That's one example. I would love to go to Europe with a sack full of really cool projects of potential supply, and dump it in front of in the bigger places of demand in Europe, for example, and say, dudes, here's a whole lot of supply. Do you want to buy them? Can we have an offtake agreement in aggregate for all of these? Because sometimes international buyers, they want a larger volume than an individual project could supply them with. A buyer that we spoke to late last year was saying, it needs to be $5 million minimum transaction. Of course, a small project can't do that, but an aggregation can. So we want to be meaningful to the scale of money that's interested in this. Some of that money is in New Zealand in terms of buyers, and some of the investors are in New Zealand, but many of them are going to be outside New Zealand. And if it's outside New Zealand where there's more momentum in these markets, then even better, because then we're not relying on local businesses. But and that said, we still want to create a market here in New Zealand. And so we want to stimulate demand by getting out there and selling this stuff. So part of this is going to help projects to do that selling, and we can provide some of that selling support and provide some examples and suggestions on how to do your pitch and what kind of story to tell, because this is something that we've had more experience in.
Great, thank you, Sean. The next two questions I'm going to see if I can wrap up together, from Steph Virco and Chantal Pagel. Sorry if I'm getting the names wrong. And this is around kind of whether we're looking at biodiversity projects at the moment, but whether in terms of scope, in terms of what we're looking for, in terms of outcomes. Steph mentioned that you're also looking at social and cultural outcomes, and then Chantal refers to are we also looking at, can nature-based solutions also provide scenarios where we're looking at impacts on climate change, and whether that's a criteria in projects, and that kind of, I suppose that addresses the kind of main overall theme that we're looking at: sustainable development projects in general, and biodiversity credits are one part of that. I'm just wondering whether you might have a quick comment around that, because of course we want to focus on biodiversity, but still we know in terms of the bigger picture.
Certainly. So BioCredita is the biodiversity scope of the Ekos SD program. Ekos SD stands for Sustainable Development. And that's why the registry is called the Ekos SD Registry, because in the future we envisage having projects that are biodiversity project scope, other ones that are climate resilience projects, others that might be water quality projects, others that would be no poverty, rural electricity access. Any of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is inside scope of the Ekos SD program. And so if any project developers listening now, or anyone in your networks, are interested in say, a water quality project or a climate resilience project or a mental health project, all of these fit within the domain of sustainable development. Don't be afraid to apply. We're going to focus on biodiversity, certainly, but it would be useful to perhaps have at least one project that sits outside the biodiversity scope so that we can showcase what, for example, a community mental health project could be. And I'm thinking providing low-cost services for mental health support to at-risk communities that can't otherwise get access to the same sort of support through the government system, or where it's very low and non-comprehensive or something. I mean, that would be one example. That's sort of the future scope, but if anyone has an interest in that in the near term, sure, don't hesitate to put in an application.
Great, thanks, Sean. Then a question that came up earlier on around the kind of verification, who does a third-party verification, because I think, kind of what you've just highlighted before, the scopes can, in terms of what we're looking at, could be pretty broad. So who are these third-party organizations that we might work with, and what's, what in terms of where does that fit in, and how important is that?
Third-party organizations for project development, is that?
Yeah, for project development in terms of verification process. And
well, as a project developer, you need to meet all of the criteria of the standard and the methodology, and that might include some aerial imagery and remote sensing and GIS, because you need to do some pretty clever maps, and maybe you don't have that capability in-house, so you need some support for that. So you need to outsource that by getting a service provider who will provide that to you, and you can get that from anybody. We could provide that if you want that from us, but that would be on a consulting basis where we would enable our team to create those maps for you. You may need support from an outsourced entity for business development. So maybe setting up your Xero account to create the foundations for your social enterprise in terms of business administration and governance and financial discipline, financial controls, and these kinds of things. And maybe that's not inside your capability because you're an ecologist who knows lots about geckos and waterways and whatever, mitochondria, but you're not experienced in business administration because it's not your happy place. Well, again, that would be ideally outsourced to somebody. We can be that outsourced entity. We can provide that support, but we don't have to be the one who provides it. It could be anybody. The funding to get that support, again, comes back to what is it going to cost you to stand up this project? How much? And this comes back to your budget. And that comes back to your project idea note, which is going to be used to raise money to do the full project development.
Thank you, Sean. I am mindful that we are fairly close to the end of our hour, so I might just throw one more question at you. This has been upvoted a couple of times. So can projects be on council-owned land? The community sometimes wants to do projects on public land, which wouldn't happen otherwise.
Yes. Yes, as long as the council is not using this financing channel to avoid doing its core business in supporting and looking after nature on its own land. So, when it comes to publicly owned land, we would, and this is written into the Ekos SD Standard, is that we would look very closely at why the council can't fund this. So you'd have to show why the council couldn't fund what you're proposing to do. And if that's fair enough and it's valid, then no problem. It'd be on central government owned land, we'd have to look extremely closely because central government has got access to a much larger pool of resources, and sometimes the allocation of resources. What we want to safeguard against is the biodiversity credits market being used as an excuse to starve funding from conservation by public entities in the public good on public land, right? So that's a sensitive topic for very good reason, which is why any proposals we'd have to look at quite closely.
Right. Thank you, Sean. I think we might just have to leave it at that. I think that's all we've got time for at the moment. But thank you so much for everyone for firing the questions through, upvoting, and really engaging so actively. That's really much appreciated. So thank you, Sean, for sharing your insights on how the Accelerator program fits in with BioCredita. And thank you, everyone who's joined us. Just a special mention also to the Ekos team in the background as well. We're obviously the two faces of Ekos at the moment, but also most notably Guy, who's been making sure that the tech side of things are running smoothly in the background. So thanks very much. So we hope you feel informed and inspired by what you've heard. If you still have queries, not to worry. To reiterate, all the questions will be considered and answered on our website and shared with all participants. To learn more, you can go straight back to that same website, the Ekos website. Look for the homepage link to biodiversity credits to learn more about BioCredita and to support projects as well, like our inaugural one, Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari, which Sean mentioned earlier on. So we look forward to seeing you at future webinars or other events possibly. I wish you a great day and also a relaxing and enjoyable weekend to follow. So mā te wā, great to see you all.